The silence that befell the dining room was not empty, it was heavy, suffocating, and sharper than the crystal wine glass. Julian had just sat down on the mahogany table with a deliberate, echoing thud outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on Chicago's Gold Coast. The wind howled off Lake Michigan, battering the glass, but the storm inside was far more destructive. 25 guests sat frozen forks, suspended halfway to their mouths, eyes darting nervously between the head of the table and the kitchen island where I stood. I am Evelyn Sterling, 68 years old, and in that agonizing moment, watching the candlelight flicker across the face of my only son, I realized that my greatest failure wasn't in business but in the monster I had lovingly created. Julian adjusted the cuffs of his Italian silk shirt, a garment that cost more than my father had earned in a year of factory work, and cleared his throat, ensuring he had the undivided attention of every cousin, colleague, and socialite present. Mom, if you intend to keep living here under my roof, you need to start paying rent like any other tenant, or you need to leave. The sentence hung in the air, toxic and absurd. Julian smiled, a tight, confident expression that didn't reach his eyes, waiting for the applause of agreement from his wife Vanessa, who sat beside him looking like a porcelain doll dipped in malice. What? Julian didn't know, and he couldn't possibly fathom in his bubble of arrogance. Was that the 4,000 square foot penthouse he boasted about was mine? The sleek black Aston Martin cooing in the private garage downstairs was mine. The platinum American Express card Vanessa had used to purchase the vintage Chanel dress she was currently wearing was mine. Everything, absolutely everything that defined Julian Sterling's existence belonged to the gray-haired woman standing in the kitchen with gravy stains on her apron, the aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing which usually brought warmth to my heart now turned my stomach. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, peeling potatoes, baking pumpkin pies from scratch, and basting the bird exactly the way Julian liked it, ensuring the skin was perfectly crisp. My hands, gnarled from decades of hard labor before the money came, trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the granite counter. Clara offered me a pitying look from the far end of the table, her lips moving in a silent apology. I didn't need. Julian, oblivious to the shift in atmospheric pressure, continued his performance. He gestured grandly with his wine glass, the deep red liquid swirling dangerously close to the rim. It is simple economics, Mom. This is prime real estate. The maintenance fees alone are astronomical. I'm a senior partner at the firm now, and image is everything. We need the space. If you can't contribute, maybe a retirement home in the suburbs is more your speed. Vanessa chimed in, her voice a melodic purr that grated on my nerves. She placed a manicured hand on Julian's forearm, the diamond on her ring catching the light. Julian is right, Evelyn. We are thinking of your comfort. The city is so loud, and this apartment is far too big for an elderly woman to navigate. We have friends coming over, often business associates. It creates a certain impression to have one's mother hovering in the background. It's just not professional. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the ghost of my late husband William in Julian's jawline, but none of William's soul in his eyes. William had been a man of calloused hands and a heart so big it eventually gave out on him. We had built Sterling horizons from a single rusted pickup truck and a toolbox, renovating dilapidated row houses in the South Side when no one else would touch them. We ate canned beans for dinner so we could buy quality lumber. We slept on a mattress on the floor of our first office so we wouldn't miss a call. Julian knew none of this. To him, the Sterling Empire was just a magic tap that flowed with endless money, a birthright he believed he had earned simply by existing. The disrespect was a physical blow, a slap that stung my cheeks. But it was also the clarity I had been denying myself for years. I had crippled him. My love had been a crutch, not a ladder. By shielding him from the rain, I had ensured he never learned how to build a shelter. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, the movement slow and deliberate. The sound of the fabric brushing against my skin seemed deafening in the silent room. I walked out from behind the island, ignoring the heavy platter of turkey I was meant to serve. I stopped at the edge of the dining room, looking at the sun I had carried, birthed, and worshipped. You are right, Julian, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Julian blinked, confused by my lack of tears or begging. He had expected the guilt trip, the weeping mother scene that would allow him to feel magnanimous by letting me stay for a reduced rate. Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable, Mom. We can discuss the numbers tomorrow. I was thinking $0 a month would be fair for your room. I didn't answer. I turned and walked down the long hallway toward the guest suite, which had been my bedroom for the last 3 years since I supposedly retired. Behind me, the hum of conversation hesitantly resumed. The guests, unsure if the show was over. I heard Vanessa giggle, a sharp tinkling sound inside my room. I didn't cry, I didn't collapse. I went to the small safe bolted inside the closet, spun the dial, and retrieved a thick manila envelope inside, where the deeds, the incorporation papers of Sterling Horizons LLC, the trust documents, and the detailed financial ledgers. I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through them. Evelyn Sterling, majority shareholder. 100% ownership, Julian Sterling. Beneficiary revocable. I looked at the lease agreement for the penthouse tenant. Julian Sterling, rent $0, landlord Sterling Horizons LLC. It was a fiction I had maintained to bolster his ego. I packed a single suitcase, just the essentials: my comfortable shoes, my wool coat, a photograph of William Emney standing in front of our first finished building in 1984, and my laptop. I left the jewelry, the silk scarves Julian bought me with my own money in the comfort of the life I had built. I checked the time on my phone. It was 8 in the evening on Thanksgiving. I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Marcos," I said when the deep voice answered on the second ring, "I need you to execute Protocol Zero." There was a pause on the other end. Marcus Thorne had been William's best friend and was now the ruthlessly efficient legal counsel for our company. He knew exactly what Protocol Zero meant. It was the nuclear option we had drafted 5 years ago when Julian first started showing signs of entitlement, a document I swore I would never use. "Evelyn," Marcus said, his voice laced with concern, "it is Thanksgiving. Are you absolutely certain this will destroy him?" "No, Marcus," I replied, looking at the closed door of my bedroom. "Saving him will destroy him. Letting him stay like this is what will kill him. Do it. Prepare the eviction notice, revoke the vehicle authorization, and cancel the credit cards. I want it all effective by tomorrow morning. I understand. Where will you go to?" "The bungalow in Andersonville, the one he doesn't know about." I hung up. I smoothed my skirt and grabbed the handle of my suitcase. I walked out of the room, down the hallway, and past the dining room where dessert was being served. Julian was laughing at a joke, holding a glass of port. He didn't see me. He didn't see his mother walking out of his life. I took the service elevator down to the lobby to avoid the doorman's questions, hailed a taxi in the biting Chicago wind, and didn't look back. The next morning, Black Friday, dawned gray and frigid. Julian woke up with a hangover and a sense of victory. He had asserted his dominance. He was the man of the house. He reached for his phone to check his emails, expecting praises from his boss or messages from friends about the party. Instead, the first notification was a high-priority email from the legal department of Sterling Horizons LLC. Subject: immediate termination of lease agreement and notice to vacate. Julian frowned, rubbing sleeve from his eyes. He sat up, the Egyptian cotton sheets pooling around his waist. He tapped the email. "Dear Mr. Sterling, per the instruction of the property owner, your lease for the penthouse at 1,500 North Lake Shore Drive has been terminated, effective immediately, due to violation of the good faith clause. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in formal eviction proceedings." He laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. This had to be a prank. He dialed Marcus Thorne's number. "Marcus, old buddy," he said when the lawyer answered, "I just got the weirdest email from the firm's system, some glitch about an eviction. You might want to fire the it guy, Mr. Sterling." Marcos's voice was ice cold, devoid of the jovial uncle tone. Julian was used to it. "Is not a glitch. You are being evicted. The owner has reclaimed the property." "The owner?" Julian sputtered. "My mother lives in the guest room. I run this place." "Who is the owner?" "The owner is Sterling Horizons LLC, of which your mother, Evelyn Sterling, is the sole proprietor. You have been living there as a guest of the company. That privilege has been revoked." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "That's insane. Mom is a retired housewife. She doesn't own the company. Dad left it to your father, left everything to your mother. Julian, every brick, every cent, every share. She has allowed you to play executive. She has allowed you to live in the corporate penthouse. She has allowed you to drive the corporate vehicle. Speaking of which, the Aston Martin has been reported as recalled. A tow truck is en route to your building." Now Julian jumped out of bed, rushing to the window down on the street 7 floors below. A flatbed truck was already backing up to the garage entrance. "No, no, no," he screamed, dropping the phone. Vanessa stirred in the bed, groaning. "Julian, keep it down. My head hurts." "Vanessa, get up," Julian yelled, scrambling for his pants. Mom owns everything. She's kicking us out." Vanessa sat up, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about? She owns the apartment. She owns the company. She owns the cards." Vanessa grabbed her purse from the nightstand and pulled out the platinum card. She dialed the number on the boft with trembling fingers. She listened for a moment, her face paling to a sickly shade of white. "Decline," she whispered. "The account is closed." "Julian, I tried to buy coffee this morning on the app and it didn't go through. I thought it was the Wi-Fi." The reality hit them like a freight train within 48 hours. Julian went from a master of the universe to a man with nothing but a wardrobe of expensive suits and no place to hang them. The Humiliation was absolute. Vanessa left him 3 days later. She didn't even pretend it was about love. "I can't live like a pauper, Julian," she had said, as she packed her Louis Vuitton bags. "You lied to me. You said you were rich. You're just a trust fund baby whose mommy took the credit card away." Julian found himself standing on the sidewalk of a slush-covered street in the south side of Chicago 2 weeks later. He had rented a studio apartment above a laundromat with the meager savings he had in his personal checking account money he hadn't spent on dinners or trips. The room smelled of detergent and stale cigarette smoke. The radiator clanked aggressively, providing barely enough heat to keep his breath from misting in the air. He sat on the floor surrounded by boxers and wept. He wept for the loss of his car, his home, his wife, but mostly for the shattering of his identity. He had no idea who Julian Sterling was. "If he wasn't rich for the first month, he tried to call me. He sent angry texts. 'How could you do this? I'm your son. This is cruel.' I read every single one and I wept in my bungalow, but I did not reply. I blocked his number eventually, not out of malice, but to force him to find another way. He needed to hit the bottom. He needed to feel the texture of the rock before he could start climbing." By January, the money ran out. Julian applied to other architecture firms, but word had spread in the tight-knit circle of Chicago real estate. Reputations traveled faster than the wind. He was known as the arrogant princeling who had been cut off. No one wanted to hire a liability, desperate, starving, and facing eviction from his shithole apartment. He did the only thing he could. He reached out to a name he remembered from his childhood, a man who had sent a wreath to his father's funeral. Elias Vance was a general contractor who ran a small crew doing renovations in the gritty neighborhoods of West Chicago. He was a giant of a man with skin like weathered leather and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He met Julian at a diner at 6 a.m. Julian wore his least expensive suit, which still looked ridiculous next to Elias's Carhartt jacket. "I need a job, Elias," Julian said, staring at his coffee. "I'm an architect. I can design." "I don't need an architect, pretty boy," Elias grunted, cutting into his stack of pancakes. "I need a laborer. I need someone to hold drywall, mix cement, and tear out rot. Minimum wage, cash at the end of the week. You start at 7. Julian looked at his hands, soft and manicured. "I've never done manual labor." "Then you better learn faster. You don't eat. Your daddy wasn't afraid to sweat, are you?" That challenge sparked something in Julian, a tiny ember of pride amidst the ashes of his ego. "I'll take it." The next 6 months were a hell. Julian had never imagined. His muscles screamed in agony. Every night his hands blistered, bled, calloused, and then blistered again. He came home covered in drywall dust and grime, too tired to even shower. Sometimes he learned the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. He learned that respect on a job site isn't bought with a title. It is earned by carrying the heaviest load without complaining. He was mocked by the other workers, initially called a prince, but when he showed up day after day through blizzards and heat waves, the mockery turned into a grudging acceptance. One lunch break in July, sitting on a stack of plywood eating a sandwich he had made himself, Julian looked at the building across the street. It was a derelict tenement, boarded up and condemned. A homeless family was huddled in the doorway. He pulled out a crumpled napkin and a carpenter's pencil. He started to sketch not a glass tower or a luxury penthouse, but a renovation. He saw how the bones of the building could be saved, how the layout could be optimized for multiple families, how thermal insulation could reduce heating costs for low-income tenants. He spent his nights working on the design. He went to the public library to use the computers researching grants and zoning laws. He found out that the building was owned by the city and slated for demolition. He drafted a proposal, the Phoenix Project, affordable, sustainable housing that prioritized dignity over profit. It was brilliant, it was practical, and it was exactly the kind of work William Sterling had dreamed of doing before he died. But Julian had no capital. He had no investors. He had only one option. He knew Sterling Horizons accepted blind submissions for their philanthropic arm once a year. The review board was anonymous. He submitted his proposal under the name J. Vance, using Elias's last name to avoid immediate rejection. 3 weeks later, he received an email inviting him to pitch the project at the Sterling Horizons headquarters. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He would have to walk back into the tower he was banned from. He would have to face the board. He borrowed a clean shirt from Elias, polished his work boots, and shaved his beard when he walked into the boardroom. The air was air-conditioned and smelled of expensive coffee, a scent he hadn't smelled in nearly a year. Sitting at the head of the table was me. I looked older, my hair completely white, now my face lined with the stress of the past year. Beside me was Marcus. When Julian entered, Marcus gasped audibly, Julian looked different. He was thinner, wiry, his skin was tanned from working outdoors. He didn't walk with the swagger of entitlement. He walked with the steady, grounded gait of a man who knows the ground beneath his feet. He didn't look at me with anger, he looked at me with fear, yes, but also a strange, heartbreaking respect. "Hello, Julian," I said, keeping my voice professional. "You are Jay Vance." "I am," he said, his voice raspy. I apologized for the deception. I wanted the work to speak for itself. "Proceed," I said, gesturing to the screen. Julian peached. He didn't use buzzwords. He didn't talk about ROI or market synergy. He talked about the insulation R values. He talked about the dignity of the separate entrance. He talked about the cost of drywall and how he could salvage the existing brickwork to save 15% of the budget. He spoke with the authority of someone who had bled on the materials. He was describing when he finished. The room was silent. "This is a low-margin project." Marcus noted, playing devil's advocate. "Why should Sterling Horizons invest?" "Because it's right," Julian said, looking directly at me, "and because a wise man once told me that we build to shelter, not to show off." My father said that I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I held them back. I stood up the board. "We'll deliberate. Please wait outside." Julian nodded and left the room as soon as the door clicked shut. I looked at Marcus. He was smiling. "He knows the price of drywall," Marcus whispered. "He actually knows the price of drywall. He knows the price of life." I corrected. "Approve it. Full funding, but with one condition: he has to manage it himself on site, no office." When we called Julian back in, he looked like he was facing a firing squad. "We have approved the Phoenix project," I announced. Julian's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Thank you, God, thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't," I said, "because if you do, you know exactly what the pavement tastes like." The next year was the hardest and best of Julian's life. He built that building. He fought with inspectors, negotiated with suppliers, and worked side by side with his crew. I watched from afar. I drove by the site in my old sedan, parking down the block to watch him point at blueprints, to watch him laugh with Elias, to watch him help an old woman carry her groceries past the construction fence in November. The project was finished. 12 families moved into safe, warm, beautiful apartments on Thanksgiving Day, exactly 2 years after our fateful dinner. Julian knocked on the door of my bungalow in Andersonville. He had found me. I opened the door. He held a bottle of wine, not an expensive vintage, but a decent table wine in a folder can. "I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. The bungalow was small, cozy, filled with the smell of roasting turkey. Julian looked around, taking in the modest furniture, the lack of servants. "It's nice here, Mom," he said gently. "It feels like home." "It is home," I said. He sat at the small kitchen table and opened the folder inside. It was a check. It was for $24. "Zero. It's not everything I owe you," he said, meeting my eyes, "but it's the first installment. I calculated the rent for the penthouse for the 3 years I lived there, plus the car payments, plus the credit card bills. I'm paying you back every cent. It might take me 10 years, but I'm paying you back." I looked at the check. I saw his calloused hands resting on the table, the scars on his knuckles, the dirt under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. I reached out and took the check. I looked at the amount, thinking of the sweat and exhaustion it represented. Then I slowly tore the check in half, and then in half again. "Mom," Julian stood up, panicked. "It's good money. I earned it. I didn't steal it. I know you earned it, Julian," I said, my voice cracking with the emotion I had held back for 2 years. "That is why I don't need it. The debt is paid." "Paid? How you paid it?" "With your character," I said, walking around the table to stand before him. "You paid it when you learned to respect the work. You paid it when you built homes for those families instead of a monument to yourself. You paid it when you walked in here, not to demand, but to give." Julian crumbled. The stoic facade he had built over the last 2 years broke, and he hugged me. He buried his face in my shoulder and sobbed, deep, racking sobs of a child who had been lost in the dark and finally found the light. I held him, stroking his hair, feeling the solid muscle of his back, the strength of the man he had become. "I missed you, Mom," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I was so blind. You were sleeping, my love," I whispered. "I just had to wake you up." We ate Thanksgiving dinner together, just the two of us. The turkey was dry because I had been distracted, and the wine was cheap, but it was the best meal of our lives. We talked about construction, about zoning laws, about the history of Chicago. He asked questions about his father, real questions about who William was, not just how much money he made. 5 years later, Julian stands on a podium in the biting Chicago wind. He is accepting the Architect of the Year award for his contributions to sustainable urban development. He is married now to a school teacher named Sarah, who loves him for his heart, not his wallet. I sit in the front row, wrapped in my wool coat, clapping until my hands sting. He steps up to the microphone. He looks at the crowd, then he looks at me. "People ask me often how